So the president talked for about 40 minutes. We were expecting the former commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, to take questions. This had been billed as a news conference and that reporters would be at least available. There would be the former president for their questions. So we didn't see that. He did range a lot in topic. He spent a lot of time on the case against him. He did mention the gag order that he's still under, and he was careful at times, very careful to mention that and why he was saying things the way that he was. And there were some names, references to people, but without their names, that sort of thing. But for the most part, you saw him lay out that case. And I want to bring in now Bret Baier, Chief Political and Special Report Anchor. So, Bret, what was really fascinating to me about this very first lengthy time, because New York supporters last night got to see him on the sidewalk for a little bit, but the first lengthy time we got to hear from the former president since that guilty verdict yesterday. What did you make of it?
Yeah, Harris, good morning. I think when he first walked out, you're probably going to hear that line a lot. His first line where he said, if it can happen to me, it can happen to you. And focusing then on the key issues that he thinks that this campaign will circle around: illegal immigration, inflation, the economy, energy issues, a push for electric vehicles, problems around the world, saying he wants to fix that, and that's the most important thing. As you said, he went into detail about that case and how he believed it was rigged and a scam, calling it an unconstitutional gag order, saying that the judge at one point calling him a tyrant and making decisions that put his finger on the scale. He pledged that his team will appeal on a number of different fronts and believes that's going to have success. Didn't really get into what he thinks that the guilty verdict will do for his election chances, but he did go into things that he felt were wrong about the judge's decisions, specifically about not or limiting the scope of the testimony from a potential witness, Brad Smith, the FEC expert. He said he wanted to testify. He has said that before, but he didn't, obviously. He said the reason was because the judge had widened the scope of what they could cover and that his lawyers advised him not to testify. It's important to note that he didn't testify. He then kind of talked about the fallout from this. There's only one poll. He cited the Daily Mail poll, but he also pointed to fundraising, record fundraising overnight, 485,000 different donors, $38.4 million. I thought it was interesting that he was appealing to people saying, listen, I'm honored to be in this position. It's not great. It doesn't feel great, but he said he's honored to fight this fight for you, for the country, and for the Constitution. Obviously, his critics come after him about January 6th, and you heard him deal with that as far as the January 6th committee. He said, I'm willing to do whatever I have to do to save our country and save our Constitution. November 5th will be the most important day for our country, and that will be the ultimate determination. Yeah. Harris, I think what you saw in this is an encapsulation of how he's going to deal with this on the campaign trail going forward.
Certainly.
That this is something, but that what matters to people at home is something different.
Let's talk about that campaign trail for just a second. You know, there are a couple of things coming up on the calendar, and I'll ask my team here to pop that calendar back up if they would, just real quickly so people can see this. July 11th is an important day. Look, there's some important days in between, you know, then and now. And of course, June 27th, the first debate between Trump and President Biden, of course, will be critical. But 4 days before a Republican National Convention, and the press will be on. I've got Trey Gowdy with me now. He's on set with me, Bret. And so the team can put him in play as well. But when you look at this, the next important date will be when he can argue, can you move this? Because 4 days later is the Republican National Convention. What does this do potentially for fundraising between now and then? Maybe boost it, Bret. But at some point, there's always a cooling off when big things happen, good and bad. You and I have been in the business long enough to know that. There's that huge reaction right after an event, and then there is sort of this haze of not forgetfulness, but it begins to wear away a little bit. But up until the pinnacle before that Republican National Convention, a lot of cash haul. And then if he's hampered at all by the sentencing day, your thoughts?
Well, I just think that the fundraising is going to continue. I think it's definitely going to fire up his base. I think that you've already seen that, and I think you'll continue to see that. I'm not sure that we fully understand or can comprehend at this point what it means for independent and swing voters, for suburban women, for the title of convicted felon, and how much the Biden campaign really goes after that. It could, as many people have talked about, backfire if they go down that road and fire people up and say that this was a political operation. But I think that the distance between the sentencing and the convention is fascinating. And what this judge decides to do, Trey would know better than me, but if there's some way that he is somehow put into jail or put on probation, it would likely happen after the appeals process has run its course, which means after the election. But just the sentencing being that close to the time that he takes the nomination is just a fascinating juxtaposition.
Well, Bret, if you have a second, let's ask Trey to weigh in on that.
There's never a good time to have a sentencing hearing. That's been my experience in life. You don't ever want to appear in front of a judge. You can make the argument that that the cloud of an in custodial sentence, the threat of going to prison, is what will motivate Trump voters and supporters even more. So if I'm President Trump, I continue to say, look, I'm willing to go to jail to save this country. I highlighted, though, Bret made note of it. He said, I am willing to go to jail to save this country. I want to move the sentencing hearing because I want the threat of jail hanging over the convention, hanging over the election, because I want people knowing that I have been victimized by this system in your stead.
That is really interesting. And Bret, what does that do politically for President Biden, who, by the way, we thought we might hear from Biden coming up because he's doing some travel today. And we may. He didn't talk as he was boarding one of the aircraft to take him to where he was going. But there's a potential. Where does this put him? And what happened to the promise that Politico was reporting about, Bret, that, you know, the White House would have the president go out and he'd talk there at the White House? It would be, you know, a big national response to the verdict. And then all of that went away. Reuters reporting, nope, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think that died away quickly, and I think they realized that the boomerang effect here politically could be a bad thing. We saw a statement from the Biden-Harris campaign yesterday, Harris, that was, you know, pretty pointed, but essentially came to the same point, which was that the ultimate way is for the American voters to decide whether Donald Trump should be in the Oval Office or not. Interestingly, you mentioned Politico. They had Biden aides saying last night that there are 3 reasons that they should be hands-off. 1, there's no need to spike the football when it's already dominating coverage on every network. 2, polling suggests the race will turn on other issues, so seizing on the conviction may not be a good thing. And 3, they can always readjust if the conviction somehow turns into a more of an anchor for former President Trump. So I think that you're going to see from the Biden campaign kind of this distance, and let's see how it falls out. If there's a tectonic shift in the polling, you know, you're probably going to see both sides adjust.
Oh, interesting. You know, you mentioned the Daily Mail poll that the president referenced for just a moment. That was a quick flash poll. Even the president said it was in the last 12 hours. But our polling here at Fox News, and again, I'm going to ask our team to pop this up, has shown that there really is some immovability right now for voters, that this really didn't make a difference. And we've been talking with them in the long haul leading up until now, and we'll continue that conversation through our Fox News polling. But what that shows is that, I don't know, the term these days is baked in. I don't really know if that's right. But what it is it's calculated per voter based on perhaps what's best in their own interest, like the bad inflation that we have and that's been so stubborn. So there it is. More likely to vote for Trump, 15%. Less likely to vote for Trump, 17%. And this is if he were found guilty. No different, 67%. And that has held over the last few weeks. Bret, before we let you go, I want to get your thoughts on that. You and I are both talking to voters. We're out in the world holding town halls, so on and so forth. Is that kind of consistent with conversations that you've been having with voters from every voting ilk?
It is. There is a lot of sense that, does this mean a lot to me? No. There is a warning, though. There's a cautionary tale here. Mark Mellman and others have said voters, when they're polled, are not really good at being put in an alternate reality and predicting how they would feel. In other words, he had a quote that said, a lot of people don't even predict what they're going to have for dinner yet. Because you're asked, what would you feel if this was a guilty? Well, now it's here. And now you've heard this. Now you are feeling what it is to have the former president, the first to be criminally prosecuted and to face potential jail time. And now he's guilty. What does that mean for you now? So these polls in the next days and weeks are the ones that we're going to watch closely. But I agree with you, Harris. When I talk to people, they care about the issues that they care about, how they feel around the kitchen table, how they're going to pay their bills, inflation, illegal immigration, and how it's affecting things. And I don't think that's going to change from now until November 5th.
Well, and, for me, it's usually at the grocery store with the kids, so we're gathered around all those high-price food items. And then I was recently at home in Arizona, and energy was a conversation. When are we going to be energy independent again so everything isn't so high? I mean, it's fascinating. People are more drilled in than we think. And that'll be a good thing for the country because we all got to vote. Bret Baier, thank you. I appreciate your time today and reacting to all of this news with me. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Trey Gowdy is with me in studio. Trey, I want to get through some housekeeping notes right now. And, a drumbeat that I'm hearing from people I talk with who watched that verdict come down is, why did this happen?
It happened, well, you can go back several months. Pretrial rulings have an impact on the verdict. The verdict is kind of a natural and probable consequence of everything that happens up until that point. I'll give you one example. So Robert Costello, I said he was kind of a net loss, I thought, for the defense, and President Trump made reference to his testimony. I've never, in my 20 years in a courtroom, seen a jury say you cannot explain an answer. I've seen plenty of judges say, you have to say yes or no, and then you can explain. With Costello, this judge would not allow him to explain his answer. So you got an email up there. The answer is, yes, I said that. Can I explain the context? And the judge says, no, you cannot. I've never in 2 decades seen that happen before. One other political point, if you'll allow me, I think who President Trump picks as a running mate may actually matter more than this conviction. I think if he picks, and look, I am biased, but I think if he picks someone like Tim Scott, who may appeal to suburban women who may have some reluctance as it relates to the former president, I think that potentially moves the needle even more than a felony conviction. I never thought I'd say that, but I think it's true.
All right. I'm going to just hang on your words as we say goodbye to each other today. Trey Gowdy, thank you so very much.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.